welcome back to another episode of Cash, Color, and Control, exploring how race, money, and power collide in the tax system. I'm Esther with the Colorado Fiscal Institute. We are so excited to be back with episode 2 of our podcast. And if you caught episode 1, you know that we kick this off by talking about tax justice as a social justice issue, how states wield their power through tax policy, and really how modern day tax policies came from, a lot of them came from the Reconstruction era. So we're excited to continue more of this conversation with episode 2. For today's episode, we're excited to welcome Shan from Soul to Soul Sisters, the Black Civic Engagement and Policy Coordinator. Soul to Soul Sisters is a great and longtime CFI partner. Welcome, Shan. Please introduce yourself and Soul to Soul to the folks.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
My name is Shan. I'm the Black Civic Engagement and Policy Coordinator at Soul to Soul Sisters, like Esther said. And Soul to Soul Sisters Love-Based Revolution is a racial and reproductive justice nonprofit based here in Denver. We do a few different things. We have a Black Civic Engagement and Policy program that I work in. We do all things voter education, civic engagement, policy work at the state capitol. We have our Black Healing Health and Joy program that does a lot of our wellness events and also works with our Sacred Seeds Birth Worker Collective. And we also have our Racial and Economic Justice program that does a lot of our mutual aid, reparations, and racial justice work. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. Excited to have you here. Shan, we wanted y'all to join us for this episode because we, for our organizations, it's really, obviously really easy to see the intersection and interaction between racial justice and tax policy. And we're going to get to talk today about how all of those collide, racial justice, tax justice, and civic engagement.
Mm-hmm.
We see these parallel things throughout history, right? This pattern of using tax policy in a way that we know is harmful and racist, at the same time that we also see these movements to disenfranchise specifically people of color from being civically engaged. And so we're going to share some examples, state level examples, a lot of examples coming from the South that really have at their core this idea that, like, you make it harder for people to be civically engaged. You strip them of their power to ensure that their voice is being heard and used in a way to undo those harms. At the same time that you're passing all these policies, tax policies in particular, as a tool to continue oppressing and disenfranchising people. You're going to see a lot of focus, on efforts to block Black people from accessing power, whether through the ballot or through other voting processes, and their ability to engage in civic life. We're going to start with an example from Alabama and property tax limits. So we see this movement to use taxes, particularly property taxes, to fund public education at the state level. What a lot of folks don't know is that post-Reconstruction era, there was actually a lot of gains that Black Southerners made in Southern states to be, part of legislatures. A lot of Southern states actually had predominantly Black legislatures, which is really amazing. So we see a lot of gains from the Black community. And then a lot of retaliation to those gains. And what we see is the strategic use of tax policy as a way to retaliate. So in Alabama, for instance, Alabama called the Constitutional Convention in 1871, where Alabama delegates instated really high property tax limits. And property tax, again, were one of the primary ways that still today we use to fund local public schools. So there was a big movement from Black Southerners to ensure that they could fund and create and really build out our public education system. And you do so through local property taxes. And so white men didn't like that their property was being taxed and that those dollars were being used to fund public education for all children, including Black children. And so Alabama passes this, calls this constitutional convention. They pass really high property tax limits. And that ensures that even if Black Southerners do gain control of the legislature, they won't be able to pass property tax increases on white landowning men. And one thing we really want to highlight is that this was added to their constitution. So not only are you putting something into a foundational document for the state,
Yeah.
you're making it really hard for future generations to get rid of that. Mm-hmm. We see a lot of that parallel movement of tax policy and using it in really harsh ways with voter disenfranchisement in the state as well, right?
Yeah. So to your point about the retaliation that Black voters were experiencing, so only like 4 or 5 years after the 1871 convention in Alabama, by 1883, only 3,700 Black people were registered to vote, and that was down from 140,000 Black voters. And it was because they were experiencing so much violence as retaliation. Alabama, in particular, this was happening because the KKK was kind of the unofficial military of the Democratic Party at this time. This was also back before the party switched. And so back then, it's like the Democrats are the right leaning. But yeah, the KKK was being used essentially as a military. And so they were, though not officially affiliated with the party, they are carrying out a lot of acts of violence and murders of Black people. During this time, between 1868 and 1871, the KKK committed more than 100 murders as a part of this retaliation. Alabama felt like that wasn't enough for what they had done in 1871. And so in 1901, Alabama's legislature is simultaneously passing property tax limits and introducing voter disenfranchisement taxes. Exactly. So again, like two things that seem like they're not related, but they're happening at the same convention. And so in this new constitution, Alabama makes it a point to include poll taxes, literacy tests, as well as felony disenfranchisement. And to that point, this version of Alabama's constitution is still used today in the state. And during this convention, Henry Fontaine Reese, a representative from Selma at the convention, is giving this speech. And he says, when you pay $1.50 for a poll tax in Dallas County, I believe you disenfranchise 10 Negroes. Give us this $1.50 for educational purposes and for the disenfranchisement of a vicious and useless class. And so there's so much intention put into this voter disenfranchisement. It's not like it's just like fallen into the legislature's lap as this idea. They know what they're doing and that it is intentional and it's on purpose to keep a specific group of people from being civically engaged.
Oh my God. And you're like actively, if I had pearls, I'd touch them. Those words like so clearly, like to what you just said, they know exactly what they're doing. These things are linked.
Yeah.
You can't talk about tax policy. You can't talk about tax justice. It has to do with people's money and how tax policy is all about how we collectively pay tax dollars.
Yeah.
So that, and how we spend those tax dollars to help ourselves, our communities.
Yes.
Pay for the things that government should pay for.
Exactly.
Schools, healthcare,
right.
Higher education. And you are actively passing policies that make it harder to tax the wealthy few who own property,
right,
and actively stripping Black folks from being civically engaged,
yes,
and stripping them of their money and this like collective pot of money that is supposed to be helping the collective good.
We're not that far removed from slavery. The Civil War just happened. We're in the Reconstruction era. What makes you think I have $1.50 as a newly freed Black person in order to be civically engaged in my local and state government? You know all of these things that this group of people have gone through, especially economically. And you're like, okay, but what if we put more barriers in place and made it even harder for you to actually advance and make something for yourself and your family?
It's wild stuff.
Shannon, can you talk about how one of the stated purposes of this constitutional convention was to, what was it, enact white supremacy in the state?
Yes.
It's not an accident that tax policy was
part of that. Yeah. He's the chair at the time. He was basically like, the federal constitution shouldn't be preventing us from creating a white supremacist state in Alabama.
Wow.
And it was like, okay, so again, you know, like what you're doing.
You know exactly what you're doing. And you know, in episode 1, we touched on this, that states leveraged a lot of power before the federal, what we know today as our federal national tax system. Like,
yes.
it didn't, at the federal level, it didn't really take shape until 1913. So states wielded so much power over their tax policy. And again, like we talk so much, you know, at CFI about how taxes are neutral. They are just a tool, right?
Right.
It's how you wield them that can make a difference. And we've chosen, as history has shown us, we've chosen to wield it as a tool for injustice, as a tool for racism, as a tool to economically disadvantage Black folks, people of color, and indigenous folks. So many people and so many populations with the sole focus of keeping power, wealth, access to civic engagement in the hands and control of wealthy white few.
Yeah. And knowing that, like, part of why the voter disenfranchisement is such a big push, which we get to a little bit later with Mississippi, but it's because they don't want them to have access to then also come behind them and change these things.
Exactly.
It's like, how do we make this decision now so that it is not just disenfranchising Black voters for the time period that they are in, but in hopes of disenfranchising them almost permanently.
Yeah. It's that piece, right? It's like these tax policies that are really limiting, that you're putting into the Constitution. It's like that piece of almost making it feel permanent is that same, like the parallel patterns. And I think something that we really wanted to highlight in this episode is like, don't be surprised to this day when you see harsh tax policies passed that really are especially punitive to people who earn low incomes, many times who are also people of color, come with movements to also disenfranchise those same people, and make it harder for them to vote, to be civically engaged, to be able to change and undo those harms, which is, you know, like mind-blowing, the history that you don't know, right? It keeps repeating itself. Something that you said that was really important, I think, too, among the many things, is the Constitution that you still use to this day. Alabama's property tax limits are some of the most unconstitutional in the country, and they're still part of their Constitution today. And it's really hampered Alabama's ability to fully fund education locally to the levels that they need to. So those impacts still felt today. Yeah. Another example we see in Mississippi is the supermajority requirement. So in 1890, Mississippi also holds a constitutional convention where wealthy white landowners demanded and won a supermajority requirement for state tax increases. So they're making it harder, requiring a supermajority votes in order to be able to pass any state tax increases. If you live in Colorado, you know our ballot is crazy, and you know that it's really, really hard to pass tax increases in general, even when they're, you know, equitable, more equitable in their structure. It is really, really hard to pass the tax increases. So supermajority requirements are highly undemocratic. Only, I think, 11 states today have supermajority requirements, and it is an explicit attempt to make it really hard to increase taxes. And then again, Mississippi did the same thing that Alabama did and placed it into their constitution. So again, ensuring that if Black Southerners ever did gain control again of state legislatures, they couldn't wield the power that they had, that the people gave to them through voting, to be able to undo some of those harms. So we have property tax limits, we have supermajority requirements, and then we have another example out of Mississippi with the sales tax. You know, we're so used to paying the sales tax. You go to the store, you buy, you know, pair of shoes, you pay sales taxes. It's so part of our everyday life, when it comes to transactions that we make every day, that I don't think people actually know the history of the sales tax is quite racist. So the governor of Mississippi at that time was able to convince an all-white male legislature to pass this new and create this new tax in Mississippi, the sales tax, as a way to lower and keep property taxes low
Mm-hmm.
for white landowning men. At this time, Black Mississippians are only about a generation or so removed from
Mm-hmm.
slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So their access and ability to own property was very limited. So they're not really paying property taxes, which are being used to fund public education.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have access to the same types of jobs that pay big amounts.
Right.
So they're contributing but not paying in the same way to the income taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so white folks are paying property taxes. They're paying income taxes,
Mm-hmm.
state income taxes. So what else do you have to tax that Black folks have but goods, the goods that they buy?
Mm-hmm.
And so the governor was able to convince the all-white male legislature that in order to keep property taxes low for white property-owning men, while still needing to raise this revenue for the state, they could do so by taxing the other thing you can tax Black people for, which was the goods that they bought and everyone else.
Your property taxes are high and you don't like that and your income taxes are high. So we're going to tell you, hey, these other poor people that happen to be Black.
And then again, like the focus, because the racism is there,
Mm-hmm.
and you have hate towards a whole segment of the population, you lie to the people as if poor white Southerners or white Mississippians weren't going to be hurt. Like this didn't hurt a whole bunch of the whole state, right? Of folks who weren't part of this like owning class. And then what we see today, so Mississippi passes it. Not shockingly, it ends up being a big revenue raiser for the state. And just a few short years, because it was like easier to institute, a whole bunch of states end up instituting their own sales tax. Colorado does, and not just in the South. Colorado did just 3 years after Mississippi passed theirs. If you look at the data for any of the states, sales taxes are one of the most regressive types of taxes that people pay. In Colorado, we know that it is one of the biggest contributors to how upside down our tax code is the sales tax in combination with our flat tax. So it really is regressive. And so your beliefs and your attitudes towards taxes being like negative, it's like they were built that way. It makes sense, right?
It makes sense.
But then you also have some
unfortunately
Mississippi
was kind of wildin'. Totally, can I say that?
They really were.
And it's so sad because it was kind of like, if I put Mississippi on a graph, it was like they were doing some different tactics and then some stuff changed. And so they're allowed for progression to happen, for Black people to become more civically engaged. And then again, the white people were like, we don't like that. We don't like that. Hey, what are we doing to stop this? So in 1865, Black codes are officially added to Mississippi's constitution. And so I quoted it, what the language was, and it said, no person shall be a representative elected to office unless he be a white man, a citizen of the United States, and shall have been an inhabitant of the state 2 years next preceding his election. Now you've essentially banned Black people from running for any kind of office, meaning I cannot advocate for my community in any kind of way at the state legislature in this building. I cannot try to progress my community because I have essentially been told, because of my race, I am not allowed in this space whatsoever. And then there's a turn. Congress actually kind of does a good thing. You know.
It happens. You're there.
So in 1867, they passed the Reconstruction Act, which says that all states that have adult men who have lived in that state for at least a year can vote and can be civically engaged and can participate. And so from 1867 to 1876, we see a very big boom of Black men participating in Mississippi's civics. So much so that at one point, 226 of them held public office. Mind you, this is the 1800s, the Reconstruction era. And 2 of them even went on to represent Mississippi in federal Congress. Amazing. So much progress. It's like, wow. All right.
In just a few short years.
In just a few short years, literally. Even as started progress as soon as Congress had passed these Reconstruction Acts. And then the white people said, all right.
Too much.
It's too much. There's too much progress. Black people are getting too much political power, civic engagement. They're getting a little too activated. And so, unfortunately, there begins a rollback of these civil rights between 1875 and 1890. And it also is like stifling the progression of the Black male vote at this point. And one way of this is just being very, very, very violent, unfortunately. There are a couple massacres that take place. The first one being the Vicksburg Massacre, took place on December 7th, 1874. And anywhere between, the number is estimated between somewhere between 75 and 300 Black people that were killed. And then what was worse was that, unfortunately, less than a year later, on September 4th, 1875, in Clinton, Mississippi, a massacre actually started at a Republican Party's rally. Like, they were just like having this like open forum kind of situation, and one of the candidates was giving a speech. Somebody fired a gun, and there was like no way of knowing who did that. And the immediate aftermath, 5 Black people were killed, but then the white people kind of just took that as an invitation to just kind of go on a rampage. And an additional 50 were killed over the next few days after the rally. And so there are just these constant instances of violence. And it did lead to the 1890 Constitutional Convention, where poll taxes, similar to Alabama, where they're instating poll taxes, literacy tests, and they are also introducing felony disenfranchisement crimes at this point. So if you commit a felony, you are now permanently disenfranchised and can never vote again. And then they said, that's not enough. We're going to give you one last thing. That's not enough. In 1902, they eventually adopt whites-only primary elections. And so now it is, okay, you made all this progress. We didn't like any of that. Let's end all of this on, not only are we going to enact violence on you, but we are now going to create another barrier to you being able to run for office at some point, to be civically engaged and to have representation within the state legislature.
That's the history you don't know, right? It's mind blowing, and like I think I grew up, believing that like my community was just not, they didn't care about being civically engaged. But then you learn the history. It's like, no. you've been stripped of your power and ability to engage.
Yes.
You've been stripped of your power to run for office. You've been stripped of your power to vote. Again, it like builds something in you to think that like we're not civically, like our communities aren't civically engaged. It's like, no, you took it away. And actually, in the few short years that there was progress made, you see the complete opposite, right?
Yeah.
Like when you gave Black men the ability to vote, they voted, they engaged, they ran for office, they held office, they, at the state and local levels, federally, recognized those patterns, right? Of like these tax policies passing that are really racist in nature, or their outcomes are racist in nature. And the violence too. Let's not miss like all the violence that you talked about.
Yeah.
And the parallels that we are seeing now.
Yeah,
right?
Even today, like there are states where you are permanently disenfranchised if you commit a felony. When you are done serving your felony sentence, you do regain your right to vote in the state of Colorado. A lot of southern states, including Mississippi and Alabama, do not do that. You lose that for the rest of your life. Like, I made a choice, it landed me here, and now something that I'm supposed to have a right to is just taken away from me for good. Like, I don't have any kind of avenue of reinstating this right to myself.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and again, the parallels we're seeing today, right? With this, the HR1 federal tax bill that just passed that is giving massive tax breaks to the wealthy few and corporations at the expense of everyone else, and paying for that by gutting public healthcare systems and Medicaid and SNAP. That being signed into law this summer. And then all the news about like ways that this administration is trying to strip power from folks to vote and be civically engaged. Isn't that shocking? And again, violence, right? How we're using these military tactics again to continue instilling fear. And we have ample examples. These are just a few. they don't just come from the South. I think
No.
there's a emphasis and a focus on the South, rightfully so. We have a lot of examples from the South that have created blueprints, if you will, like with the sales tax for the rest of the country. But this wasn't just in the South. This was all across the country. You can look, at California during its gold rush years. California instituted on tax on miners from any background, anyone who mined in California. But for a year, they instituted an additional tax on miners who were ineligible to become citizens, which meant it specifically fell on miners who were of Latin American and Chinese descent. And so for a whole year, they raised a quarter of their revenue just from these miners.
Wow.
Of their,
a quarter.
taxes. Yeah, a quarter.
That's
of the
not
state.
a small amount.
No,
of money.
exactly. Like that's just one example. There's many. Colorado has many, and Tabor is one of them, right? Instilled into our Constitution, 1992. Almost 33 years later, we still can't get rid of it. We have so much data that shows that like its impacts are harmful. They especially impact and harm communities of color, who are disproportionately, communities who earn the lowest incomes, and pay the highest share of that income in state and local taxes in Colorado. And so much is attributed to Tabor and our inability to tax through more equitable ways, like the graduated income tax, our ability to actually benefit from the revenue the state has and the wealth that the state has, and our inability to tax wealth. And again, in the Constitution, really hard to get rid of. And the way that it strips also people from being able to be civically engaged. You and I both know as voters in Colorado how hard it is to understand our ballot.
Because love that we get that giant blue book. And also, what does it mean? If I'm just being handed this booklet that's full of tax policy stuff, how am I supposed to make sense of that if I'm just an everyday voter?
Exactly. So all these examples, just want to leave folks with, this final thought that there's a tie between tax policy and civic engagement, and that's really important, especially in a state like Colorado, where almost all tax policy decisions are made at the ballot. So we can't talk about tax justice without talking about justice in our civic engagement efforts, and how really we can make sure that we're creating a Colorado where people actually can use their voice and have a say in our tax policy decisions. Want to just end by saying thank you. Thank you for sharing so much history with us. I know that was enlightening for me and such a learning experience for me. And thank you for joining us for episode 2 of Cash, Color, and Control. We will see you back here for episode 3.